So hello Ms. Katz and for classmates. I did my article presentation on Supreme Court of Canada rules Ontario's sex offenders registry law is discriminatory under section 15 of the charter. So let's go over some important terms. So NCR. So NCR stands for non-criminally responsible, and any person who committed an illegal action but was suffering from serious mental illness. This affects their decision making, which affects their mens rea in the crime. So now we have substantive equality. So taking into account differences in people's backgrounds and adjusting the situation accordingly based on the context given. Now we have formal equality, applying the law impartially no matter what people's backgrounds are. People who use this belief law is blind and does not have any bias. So in section 15, subsection 1, so this is the equality rights in the charter. It says that every individual is equal before and under the law, has the right to equal protection and equal benefit of the law, without discrimination, and in particular, without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, or mental or physical disability. So this applies to the case because the respondent claims NCR. So, facts about the case. So, G is charged with sexual assault. G is by law required to register with Ontario's sex offenders list, have checkups when his information changes, and every year. Based on an individual assessment, someone can be removed from the sex offenders list after a certain amount of time. However, people with mental illness are never allowed to be removed from this list. So G challenges Christopher Law. Christopher Law is also known as Ontario's sex offender registry list. So G challenges this law under section 15, subsection 1. As this section promises that there will be no basis of discrimination under the law, specifically for people with mental illness. And this case goes all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. In a 7-2 decision, they rule that Christopher's Law is discriminatory against people with mental illness. So, majority saw that people with mental illness were discriminated against and did not have a fair chance to reintegrate into society, as they were ineligible to be removed from the list. So one of the justices stated his reasons why. So the first quote is, invokes stereotypical views on people with mental illness. The second quote was, this law puts those found guilty with mental illness in a worse position than as someone without mental illness. So the first quote shows how this law stereotypes people with mental illness. The law makes people out to be with mental illness to not be salvageable and not be able to be reintegrated in society, which is not true. The second quote shows how this law stereotypes. The second quote states the inherent inequality between a person charged with and has a mental illness and a person charged with the same crime but without the mental illness. So the majority was concerned if this law treats people, specifically people with mental illness, with respect and dignity, and then substantive equality was used here to discriminate, as it saw people who were mentally ill as unable to come to the same standards as someone who did not have a mental illness because it took into their consideration the background of mental illness. So this verdict shows that Canada is attempting to live up to their name as a country that is inclusive to everyone. So the Ontario Journey said that he felt justices did not interpret the equality rights correctly. However, justices reaffirmed that the impact of the law is what matters, that they were concerned that mentally ill people were not given the same chance as others, therefore making the law unconstitutional. Now for my first discussion question, do you feel that Christopher's Law painted people with mental illness as burdens to society who are unable to redeem themselves to the same degree as people with no mental illness? So now on to connection to course content. We were taught that constitutional law is the law of the land and that no law could go before it. In this case, we see someone's constitutional rights infringed as Christopher's Law went against the law of the land. So therefore, Christopher's Law is declared invalid. So now next on we see the judicial branch of the government. So here we see one of the three branches of government in action. The judicial branch is tasked with interpreting laws made from legislators. Here they interpret the laws unconstitutional and use the remedy of striking it down, which means that the law is not used in society anymore. So here we see And then we have the third concept, which is equity versus equality. So here we see equity used to discriminate against people with mental illness. Christopher's Law took people's backgrounds of mental illness and used it as a reason to not be able to reintegrate them into society. So the justices felt that equality was the best way to go here, as all you need to do was pass a standard assessment to be able to be reintegrated into society. Your background had nothing to do with the scoring of this assessment. Well, they felt that would be the correct way. So now, going on to my second discussion question. Do you think law should be interpreted in the eyes of formal equality, meaning that law should be applied impartially without context for the situation and people involved? Or do you think law should be applied in the eyes of substantive equality, meaning people attempt to interpret the law and account for differences in people? So in my opinion, mentally ill people were discriminated on the basis of mental illness. So there's no reason why everybody else should be able to be reintegrated into society, but people who claim NCR, non-criminally responsible, should not be able to be reintegrated into society. This is clearly a bias against them and a prejudice against them, which hurts them becoming regular citizens again. So then people with mental illness clearly can redeem themselves. There's nothing that says if you have a mental illness, you can't become a better person or redeem yourself in a light that allows you to be unlisted off the sex offenders list. In section 15, subsection 1 clearly protects those with mental illness. So it says you should not be discriminated under the basis of mental illness. Clearly, Christopher's Law was discriminating people under the basis of mental illness, so I agree that the law was declared invalid and it's not used in society anymore. And then formal equality is the right way to interpret the law in this situation, in my opinion, because it just sets a standard, and anybody who sets the standard is able to be reintegrated into society, and it doesn't take into account differences, background. It's just one standard assessment you have to pass to have yourself unlisted. And the criminal system should focus on rehabilitation. So by allowing people with mental illness to not get off the sex offenders list, it allows them to not rehabilitate themselves, and I feel the criminal justice system should focus on rehabilitation opposed to punishment. These are my citations, and thank you for listening to my article assignment.